Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep going in Series 4 of the show and get Week 27 underway with another Mailbag Monday. Katie M. writes in asking a short and simple question that might not have a short and simple answer. Why did the Istari take the raiment of men and not that of elves? Well, let's take a look at what we do know before we speculate about what we don't know. So, reading from the Istari in Unfinished Tales, among men, they, the wizards, were supposed at first by those that had dealings with them to be men who had acquired lore and arts by long and secret study. They first appeared in Middle-earth about the year 1000 of the Third Age, but for long they went about in simple guise, as it were of men already old in years, but hale in body, travelers and wanderers, gaining knowledge of Middle-earth and all that dwelt therein, but revealing to none their powers and purposes. In that time, men saw them seldom and heeded them little. But as the shadow of Sauron began to grow and take shape again, they became more active and sought ever to contest the growth of the shadow and to move elves and men to beware of their peril. Then, far and wide, rumor of their comings and goings and their meddling in many matters was noised among men, and men perceived that they did not die, but remained the same, unless it were that they aged somewhat in looks, while the fathers and sons of men passed away. Men, therefore, grew to fear them, even when they loved them, and they were held to be of the elven race, with whom indeed they often consorted. Yet they were not so, because later we read, "For with the consent of Eru they sent members of their own high order, but clad in bodies as of men, real and not feigned, but subject to the fears and pains and weariness of earth, able to hunger and thirst and be slain, though because of their noble spirits they did not die, and aged only by the cares and labors of many long years. And this the Valar did, desiring to amend the errors of old, especially that they had attempted to guard and seclude the Eldar by their own might and glory fully revealed, whereas now their emissaries were forbidden to reveal themselves in forms of majesty, or to seek to rule the wills of men or elves by open display of power, but, coming in shapes weak and humble, were bidden to advise and persuade men and elves to good, and to seek to unite in love and understanding all those whom Sauron, should he come again, would endeavor to dominate and corrupt." Now, before all that, and that's super useful, there is one other bit that's going to come in handy as we think this through. They belonged solely to the Third Age, and then departed, and none save maybe Elrond, Círdan, and Galadriel discovered of what kind they were or whence they came. So, there are a few things in these passages to note that might help us come up with an answer. First, they were in simple guise, the text says, enough so that initially men thought they were other men, or at least people thought they were men. But then eventually men came to believe they were elves because they didn't die, even if they looked a little older. I'm not feeling that way at all. Second, we're never told what the elves themselves thought of them, though as old as they looked, I doubt any elf mistook them for a fellow elf. Some of the leaders of the elves, Elrond, Círdan, and Galadriel, the bearers of the three at the time, likely knew the truth of their identity. Now, third, as Katie observed in her question, the appearance as men is their raiment of sorts. Now, it's not like the usual Ainur raiment, which was simply a form chosen by that Ainur in which they wished to appear. They could change their raiment at any time. But I'm not going to quibble over semantics here. The point is, they look like men, but they aren't really men, right? Yet they were not so. Now, they were Maiar spirits, clad in bodies as of men, and yet at the same time, real and not feigned. So they are in bodies, they're man-like bodies, but they're not actually men. They're not really raiments that could be changed, right? They get hungry, they get thirsty, they get tired, they can be killed, like Gandalf was after his fight with the Balrog. One of the key things that I think we can get from this passage, though, is that they showed up around Third Age 1000. Now, this is important because it's a time in which the elves are leaving Middle-earth, and men are becoming the dominant force. Finally, I think we should note when the text says that they came in shapes weak and humble in order to accomplish their objective of uniting the opponents of Sauron. So now, with all of that as backdrop and data, let's think through the reasoning as to why they would choose forms of men and not elves. Or, to broaden the question, why not hobbits or dwarves for that matter? Well, I think we can rule out the idea of wizards showing up as hobbits simply because most people on Middle-earth didn't know who they were. But let's take a look at the other three, elves, men, and dwarves. Now, two of these almost immediately rule one another out, elves and dwarves. Thanks to their inherent lack of trust toward one another, a wizard taking the form of an elf would have a very hard time getting the trust of the dwarves, and a short, stocky wizard would just be another Gonhirim to the elves, easily dismissed and ignored. There are two key elements why I think the Istari showed up as men. At first, it's because of the fact that it's the Third Age. Now, had the wizards been necessary in the First Age? Sure, maybe elves. But it's a time of men, and so the form of men is what they take. And second, they're in shapes weak and humble. As we all know, there's nothing humble about elves. So folks, that wraps it up for Mailbag Monday. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, please email it to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Let him know it's for today's Tolkien Times, and I'll get to it as soon as possible, with priority going to supporters of the show on Patreon. Speaking of which, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to find out how you can help the show, get an ad-free feed, get an extra episode every single week, and a whole lot more. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we learn more about the professor himself. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.